We're going to continue our reflections on our 275 years of history here, and also to reflect on the question of where do we see ourselves in that history. Today I'm going to talk about a woman that's probably unknown to most of you. She was unknown to probably the whole of St. James until about 2 years ago, when a historian appeared literally on our doorstep and started talking about Charlotte. When we reflect on our history, we're obviously reflecting on things we already know. This is a case of where something has recently emerged. So history is always changing, it's always going forward, both in time and in our own knowledge. So it's not a static subject, shall we say. So we're going to talk about Charlotte Hazen Rowe this morning. And it's thanks to Reverend Dr. Reed Trewson that we now know of her existence and her importance. He was the director of the American Baptist International Ministries, which is really their missionary wing of the Baptist denomination. And he's been working since his retirement in the last couple of years on Charlotte. Charlotte's life, as you'll hear, is a life of great faithfulness to God and to her calling to be a missionary. And she does this in the face of great personal adversity and suffering. She is a woman of vision, prepared to leave her comfort zone of the east coast of the United States and go to India in the early 19th century. There she works among poor and low status women and children, mainly educating them after learning the language, but also she engages in what we might call as preaching, which she was very careful never to put in a report to the Missionary Society, because women didn't do that sort of thing, and if you did, you were heading for trouble. What makes this story particularly exciting is it's ecumenical. Her life starts at St. James, and as we'll hear, it ends at she comes back here to be buried. In the meantime, she becomes a Baptist and a missionary. So this is a story of ecumenical partnerships, if you like, of a personal kind. It's also a story about transatlantic relationships between the United Kingdom and the United States. Having said all of that, there are many mysteries that we don't know about her life. We don't know what sort of education she had as a young woman that sort of inspired her and equipped her to be a great educationist. We don't know about what happened to her when she returned from India. We know that she taught in some schools, but we have enormous amounts of blank time. So that's sort of some very broad strokes of her life. But I want to start with some more personal connections with her. If you came to any of the events around the launch weekend of the 275th in October, whether at the gala or at the retreat, you remember that we had some historical figures visit us and talk about their lives and their vision of faith. And I thought that it'd be good just for me to read that, not in the dramatic way as was done on those two occasions, but just to give a brief overview of her life before I talk to you about how I got interested in her and how I went to India following in her footsteps in September. So yes, so this is repetitious, I'm sorry, but it's a good way to start to talk about Charlotte and her importance. My name is Charlotte Hazen Rowe. If one scripture verse could be said to have shaped my life, it would be, "Faith without works is dead." Today I urge you to be people of action. Let your faith lead you to new places and new challenges. At first I seemed lucky, born into the wealthy Apley family in Lancaster in 1782. But I became an orphan and was sent to live with my eldest sister in Massachusetts. I married a good man and we had a son, but my joy as a wife and mother was short-lived. Within 18 months they were both dead. Yet God did not abandon me, for out of my grief came a spiritual awakening and I became a Baptist. This new world of faith brought me into contact with British Baptist missionaries going to India. With my background in education, I successfully made the case that I, a single woman, could be a missionary, and I arrived in Calcutta in April 1816, after 129 days at sea. Within 2 months, I had met and married my beloved Joshua Rowe, a Baptist minister stationed on the Ganges. I quickly learnt Hindi and took over the teaching and running of our various schools. I became an evangelist and preached at worship services in our home, although in any official document, Joshua was careful to write that I merely presided so as not to cause trouble. God blessed us with 3 children, but sadly Joshua died when they were young. Imagine my shock when the British Baptist Mission Society would only offer me a widow's meagre allowance, even when I took on more missionary work after Joshua's death. So I went to London to plead my case, to show them that I was not just a widow, but a missionary worthy of her hire. My words fell on deaf ears. So I returned to America and did what I knew I had to do, to teach and support my family. I went where the work was, but God gave me my final homecoming on earth in Lancaster. I returned to St. James to be buried alongside my beloved daughters, amidst all our earthly relations. Today I wonder where you could discover a new mission field, a new social frontier to cross with Jesus. So this is the story of Charlotte's life. Randy, would you mind clicking the switch for the, or David? And this is the physical, part of the physical evidence we have about Charlotte and her family being in St. James. It's a circular story. She's baptised here, she's brought up here until she's 11 years old, faithfully attending St. James, and then she goes to live with her oldest sister in Massachusetts. You'll notice that this gravestone actually isn't of Charlotte, it's of her daughters. We believe that Charlotte is buried next to them, but there doesn't seem to have ever been a headstone. But this is the gravestone marking the graves of her 2 twin daughters who died as adults. But as you can see, it talks about them being born in Hindustan, which was how India was often referred to at this time, and then being the grandchildren of William Augustus Attlee, who, if you know your revolutionary history, was a hero who worked on the safety committee and was in charge of Hessian prisoners in Lancaster during the Revolutionary War. These are what I call my fellow pilgrims. You can just see me hiding in the middle at the back there. This was taken in Serampore College in September. There was a very small group of us. The man second in on the left is Reed, who's done all the research and organised this trip. He felt that before he could do any more research, he spent a lot of time in archives. He really wanted to visit all the places that were associated with Charlotte to get a feel for where the churches and schools probably were, and maybe even find the grave of her husband Joshua. So 10 of us self-selected and volunteered to go with him. Most of these women have served as missionaries around the world for the Baptist Church in places like the Philippines, in India, and another Asian country. So it was an exciting group to be part of. I was very blessed to be with them. One of the things that was a problem setting up this trip was the whole issue of getting visas. As some of you may know, with the BJP being the majority party in India at the moment, and Prime Minister Modi very much being Hindu nationalists, they're not very keen on other religions and churches thriving, shall we say, in India at the moment. Hindus making about 80% of the present-day population, Muslims about 13%, and Christians 2%. So we were given very strict instructions about what to say on our visas about ourselves. So we didn't say we were Christians going on a mission trip, or that some of these people were going on to a missionary conference, because those people who didn't get visas. And I didn't want to I was associated with St. James in any way, and then I had to describe myself, and I was thinking, how do I describe myself in a way that's not going to attract undue attention? So Obviously, I can put down that I wrote grants for the Parish Resource Centre, or that I was a church historian, or anything like that. So after long debate, we decided that I'd put down I was a housewife as the least controversial thing. So that's how I went to India with this group. So yes, some humility and some awareness, self-awareness there. Anyway, those are my fellow pilgrims who didn't say they were missionaries in any shape or form. This is a current map of India. I just thought it'd be good to get a sense. So we flew into New Delhi, as you can see in the top left, which is the capital. We actually flew then to Patna, which was where Charlotte and Joshua had their mission station just outside, and we also went to Calcutta, where they first came into India as missionaries on ship, and then they went up to Patna. Before we dive into their sort of story a little more, I want to say a little bit about William Carey. Without him, none of this would have happened. I've always been vaguely aware of William Carey being important in church history, but it wasn't until I went to India I really began to have a greater appreciation for that. He was a sort of nobody, really, born into a very ordinary family in the middle of England. Poor, obscure family. His profession was a cobbler. He didn't even make shoes, he repaired shoes. And he taught himself Greek and Latin and discovered that he had a great gift for being a linguist. Like Charlotte, he was brought up as an Anglican. He was baptised into the Church of England, but like her, he became a Baptist convert. He was also a school teacher for a little while before he was recognised by the Baptists as being a pastor. Carey's been called the father of modern missions because he wrote a very important book at the end of the 18th century about the obligations of Christians to be tools for the conversion of what we quote heathens at the time. Mission obviously is a central part of Christianity, has been from the beginning, but Protestant denominations in particular are a little slow to pick that up. It's very much seen as a sort of thing that Roman Catholics, probably European Roman Catholics did. But Carey really started putting Protestants and mission in the Baptist Church literally on the map. So he writes a book justifying mission and encouraging mission and explaining why men and women should go out and be missionaries if they're going to be true Christians. And his motto, which you might have come across, is expect great things from God, attempt great things for God. And in 1792, he actually founds, with others, the Baptist Missionary Society. And within a year, he's off in India with other missionaries. He's a great linguist, as I say. He translated the Bible, he learned Sanskrit, and he learned a lot of indigenous languages and dialects in India. And he's been claimed to be responsible for translating the Bible into about 29 languages or dialects. And there's a very small museum at the college which he founded, which lays out all the versions that he was either directly responsible for or his team were, and I think there was over 40. It's just an amazing place to go to, sort of the intellectual density in what feels like the middle of nowhere. It's like going to the British Museum or the Library of Congress. You're just struck by intellect and gifts of people who can work with words and languages. He also takes out a printing press with him, so not only is he translating languages, he's actually literally printing them and creating the sort of typeface for a lot of these languages for the first time, which is just an incredible thing to think about. And he's creating dictionaries and all those things. And one of the most amazing things we saw when we were there, what was called a polyglot dictionary. It has 14 Indian languages in it, all laid out, one word, across the page, a huge page, and it's translated into 14 languages. It's just incredible to see it. And there were 4 volumes of this, but unfortunately 3 out of the 4 were destroyed by fire in his lifetime, so he lost all that work. But just to see one of them is just incredible. Not least because he also made a paper for it, which has turmeric in it and arsenic, so you're not supposed to lick your fingers after through the pages. So as I say, he founded Sarum College, and that was to train Indigenous ministers. And it becomes the first grant-making institution in Asia. It's recognised in the 1820s by actually the King of Denmark, because actually this part of India isn't ruled by the East India Company and the British. There are all sorts of pockets where other countries have their little sort of colonies, and this is sort of in the Danish section, which I'll explain a little bit more later. In his spare time, which I couldn't believe he had, he was actually a botanist, and so he's also produced a lot of books that first catalogue a lot of the flora of this part of India. And he's credited with founding the Horticultural Society of India at this time. We actually saw trees that he planted the seeds of, which were mahogany. India didn't have any hardwood trees, and he brought seeds over and then started cultivating other species. So why is he important? If he's just British and in India, is because he sort of creates the whole missionary movement in the Baptist church. And British Baptists actually inspire American Baptists to become missionaries. I mentioned the East India Company. This is a private company that's basically running most of India before the late 19th century. It's given a charter by Queen Elizabeth to basically have a monopoly on trade. So it's trading in everything, spices, cotton, opium, you name it, from that part of the world. It has a monopoly on it. And it also therefore has its own army, its own navy, its own currency, its own laws. And basically, it's like a private sort of kingdom in the world. And the East India Company doesn't like missionaries. It has chaplains for its British population that's in India, but it doesn't want missionaries coming over and trying to convert the local population. It wants stability. It thinks if Christians come over and start trying to convert Hindus, it's going to be bad for business. And so if you're a missionary from Britain, you can't really get a ship from Britain to India because it's a monopoly. The East India Company owns most of the ships that go into India. So what happens is the British Baptists come to the east coast of America and change ships and then go out to India from here, which is partly why it takes them such a long time to get to India, as they have to go backwards in order to go forwards. And while they're in America, they are preaching, especially in Philadelphia and Boston, and they're fundraising. So this is how the American Baptist Church gets excited about mission, and particularly Charlotte herself, who is at a church in Philadelphia, where the pastor was one of the founders of the British movement, and he's hosting all these great people passing through. So she gets fired up by all of that. And so in 1818, the British and the American Missionary Society is founded, and Charlotte is involved in the Women's Society. Like lots of women's societies at that time, it's an auxiliary organisation, it's a helping organisation, so it's largely fundraising. No one's really thinking about women being missionaries. So Carey comes through here and his followers, and then he goes out to Calcutta and then to Serampore. And Charlotte's second husband, Joshua Rowe, is part of that movement. He comes out to India because of Carey. So Charlotte manages to convince the American Mission Society that she should be a real missionary. There hasn't been a single woman who's been a missionary before. Like not to say women haven't gone out to India, but they've gone out either as the wives of ordained Baptist ministers, or they've gone out as nurses. They haven't gone out with sort of the official backing of the title missionary. And Charlotte somehow manages to convince the board. It helps that it's a very, it's only just quorum when her motion gets through. and then there's all trouble brews up after she leaves. She gets on basically the first ship out of Philadelphia before anybody decides to change their mind about her status. So she arrives in Calcutta. She's actually meant to be going to Burma, which is a couple of countries on the right of India, but they have to stop in Calcutta first, and they can't get a ship out to Burma. And there she bumps into Joshua Rowe, who was born the same year she was, 1782. As I say, became a Baptist minister, very different social background from her. He comes from a very poor family in England. And she meets him on her first day in Calcutta. He comes to sort of pick her up by boat to take her up to Serampore. They're married within 2 months of meeting each other. Not quite love at first sight, but probably the nearest any of us will see. He's definitely in the market for a wife. He's already got a mission station out on the Ganges. His previous wife has just died. He has 3 children and a mission station to run, and he's looking for a life partner who shares his values. So, sort of predetermined perhaps at some level. They get married in St. John's, which is in Calcutta. This is not a Baptist church, it's Anglican, it's Church of England then. You can only have an official marriage in British Empire if you got married in the Church of England at this point. She may have been more sympathetic to it because she grew up in St. James, but if she wanted a proper legal marriage with no questions asked, then it had to be done in an Anglican church. So this is where it was, and we visited that. Unfortunately, it was under restoration when we were there, but very impressive looking church, and quite shocking to see how wealthy it looks. But of course, all these churches were funded by the East India Company, who wasn't short of money. So we're not talking about sort of mud huts or very basic churches. This is a picture of what Patna would have looked like in 1814-15. Joshua and Charlotte go here. The actual mission station is called Diigo. It's just outside of Patna. This was the big town that was about 10 miles from where they actually lived. It was an important town. It was a station for the East India Company for their trade, and on the other side of Diigo where they lived was the British Barracks. Lots of troops were stationed in there. And the mission station there really ended up having sort of 2 tracks, if you like. Joshua wasn't very good at languages. He ended up having a ministry to the British soldiers. As I say, the East India Company gave chaplains, but they were Church of England chaplains. There were a lot of soldiers who weren't Church of England members, so they would have been Baptists or what were called non-conformists. And so he had a ministry to those men. Charlotte was gifted at languages. She learned Hindi very quickly in a time when there was no dictionary or spelling books for that sort of thing. And she had a ministry amongst very much the indigenous women and children, which may sound sort of uncontroversial and perhaps not very pioneering, but it was in the sense that women weren't always entirely accepted as teachers. Colonial America, most teachers were male, and the idea of teaching women and children in a caste system, which India had and continues to in some shapes and forms today, you didn't teach lower caste people, the poor end of the spectrum. Education was wasted on them, it was for the elite. So just by teaching ordinary women and children was groundbreaking work at this time. She also creates teachers, a generation of indigenous teachers, and by the end of her ministry there, she's running 9 schools, not just for indigenous women and children and boys and girls, but also for Europeans, because that's a great source of money. The Baptists funded work, they didn't fund sort of living, shall we say. And so it's very common for mission stations to specialise in European education in order to pay themselves a living wage, if you like. So they had this division of work. Joshua dies in 1823, and Charlotte tries to keep things going, but the money is cut off from the UK as being a missionary. They'll give her the pension, but they won't give her a salary, even though she's running everything. So in the end, she goes to London to try and plead her case, as I said earlier, unsuccessfully, and then comes back to America to continue her teaching career. So a lot of suffering, as I say, in her life, personal loss, bereavement, but a very, very hard life. This is a map of her compound at Diigo, just outside Patna. Unfortunately, we don't have an image of Charlotte, which is one of the great sadnesses of doing this research. Sort of the holy grail of studies here. We're open to ideas of where to find one, but not so far. So this was her map she drew. This is meant to be the Ganges here. This was her home. And then there were other buildings dotted around, either for other workers. They had indigenous ministers that they worked with, and orchards, and this is a cookhouse. So quite a big compound, but suffered a lot from the Ganges flooding. So life was hard physically, even when it was going well. This is Danapur cantonment. Cantonment means military barracks. And one of the fun days that we had on our visit was we wanted to find Joshua's grave. We knew he was buried in the cantonment. We had to get official permission to search there. And there were a number of challenges with this. The first was there wasn't one graveyard, there were 3. So that was news to us when we arrived. And then they were all completely overgrown. These are some of the better sections, and they were full of cows and pigs and things I didn't explore very much further than that. So we sort of poked around, I think, quite delicately. We should have gone with some weed whackers and goodness knows what, but we weren't prepared quite for that. So these are the military cemeteries that are left from that period. I think it was quite shocking for me to see them because I'm so used to the First World and Second World War military graveyards. You somehow think all military graveyards will be in that sort of condition, but this wasn't. But the good news was our guides to this area said that he would go back this month and look again for the grave because a lot of the vegetation would have died down, but I'm not convinced it would have died down sufficiently myself. So we sort of end up back here. As I say, Charlotte comes back here. She dies in Philadelphia, and she comes back and is buried at St. James. As I say, there doesn't seem to have been a headstone for her, but we don't know that. And she comes back here because she's part of the Apley family, and I presume the family made the arrangements for that. So that's why I went to India, and I think she's a very interesting figure in our church history. She obviously hasn't had her due in lots of ways. Reader's written a book about her and is hoping to get that published, and a proper marker of some description for her. It's one of the reasons I was so keen to find Joshua's grave, because it might have been a model for what we might do in the future. I think she's a remarkable woman. As I say, there's lots of mysteries about her education. She was obviously very affluent to be able to do some of these things, but she also had a life of suffering and challenge. And I just think she's a really remarkable figure that we should claim proportionately as St. James. So thank you so much for that. I'm open to questions and comments.